She was stoned until she bled for being infertile, until a poor farmer does this. Have you ever heard of a woman being stoned until she bled just for being unable to have children? Well, that's a story that happened in the rural heartland of the American Midwest, in olden times, when prejudice was even more cruel than it is today. And what happened in the end, you will be in shock when you find out. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because here you will get to know powerful, emotional, and real stories from our culture. Stories that touch the heart deeply. Now come with me, because this story is going to stir you. Mary Jane was only 20, a young woman, beautiful with a sweet gaze and a delicate way, who carried with her the dream of starting a family. She married young, as was the custom in those days, but with the passing years, the absence of children became an unbearable burden. What was meant to be a blessing transformed into a sentence of pain. Her husband, pressured by his own family, began to treat her as a burden. The people of the small town already whispered in the dusty streets, "That pretty girl isn't even good enough to be a mother." The women's gaze was one of contempt, and the men saw her as a curse. And it was on a silent night, illuminated only by lanterns in the main square, that the town decided to judge her. Mary Jane was surrounded, pushed, insulted. And when the first stone flew, she already knew that she would not leave there without scars for the rest of her life. While blood ran down her young and innocent face, her choked voice still pleaded, "It's not my fault. It's not my fault." But no one listened to her. And it is at this exact point that our story begins, and what comes next is something that will move you deeply. I take you with me to the heart of the Midwest, 1940s. Dirt roads that turned into mud in the rain. Red dust rising at the slightest wind. Wooden houses with porches and rocking chairs. Chickens scratching in the yard. At night, the darkness was almost complete, broken only by the light of lanterns and windows. The old tube radio, when it worked, would gather neighbors around, all leaning in, listening to news that arrived late and radio serials that fed dreams. It was a hard time governed by even harder customs. I walk with you through the main square, right where the church stands with its heavy wooden doors. There on Sundays the mass was packed, men in felt hats, women in long dresses and scarves on their heads, selling homemade bread, cheese, flour. The bell rang loudly, calling to duty and often to judgment. You feel the weight of others' stares, for in that town the stare of others had the force of law. Beside the church was Mr. Amancio's general store, a dark wooden counter, sacks of beans, rice, and coffee stacked high, a scale with plates, a ledger for credit with names lined up, and behind the counter, the sharp tongue of the people. It was there that stories were born and grew. "Did you hear, Mrs. Zuleika? The girl still hasn't had a baby." "A shame. So pretty, but a pretty woman who doesn't bear an heir only gets in the way. Her husband is from an important family. He doesn't deserve this shame." The phrases came low, ironic, like someone reciting a litany of condemnation. There was also the old colonel's house, now retired, but still the owner of respect and fear. His yard, surrounded by barbed wire fence, reminded everyone where one person's right ended and another's whim began. And in the center of it all, the dusty town square, where right and wrong were decided by shouting, whispering, and sometimes by a stone. I pass by the sawmill. I hear the creaking of the cut wood, the strong smell of resin in the air. Calloused, older, sweaty men stop to spit on the ground and talk about what does not concern them. They say it's her fault. A woman who doesn't have a child's an empty house. The boy's father is mad, said he's going to throw her out. In those days, science was far away. The nearest doctor attended in the next town, hours away by wagon. What mattered was tradition. And tradition there weighed more than any truth. On the outskirts of the town, almost forgotten, a road led to a simple piece of land, a few heads of cattle, a weathered board corral, a single room and kitchen. It was John Paul's house. I see him from above, as if the camera were descending to his arm, holding the hoe handle. 28 years old, strong, muscular, skin tanned by the sun, hands marked by work. John almost never spoke in town. There were those who couldn't stand the pride of a poor man who walked with his head held high. That John thinks he's a big shot just because he stares at you without looking down, grumbled a bigwig at the general store. But John did not return the crooked words. He preferred the daily work, the tending of the cattle, the quiet sound of the creek at the back of the land. In the center on the other side lived Mary Jane's husband's family, well-known people who made and unmade customs. The father-in-law, a man with a rough voice, liked to pull his watch from his pocket just to remind people of his own power. Here, the family honor is not for negotiation. The mother-in-law, always accompanied by her gossips, would align the sentencing. A woman who doesn't fulfill her role becomes a shadow in the house. And the gossips would agree in a chorus that sounded like a prayer. God save me from a fate like that. I also show you the small school, a single room with wooden desks and a blackboard. The children ran in the dirt yard, but in our story they pass in the background, almost without a voice, because those who decide everything are the adults. They are the ones who point, classify, judge, and stamp destinies. In the dark of windy nights, when the lantern trembled on the kitchen hook, the conversations became harder. Mary Jane's husband would arrive with heavy footsteps, slamming the door. We have no child because of you. My father will not stand for this shame. She, with restless hands, trying to sew a cloth to calm her chest. I pray every night. I can't give what doesn't just depend on me. Don't come at me with prayer. In this house, he who fails pays. Think with me. In a place where a man's honor was measured by his heir, how many pointing fingers fit in a square? How many doors close to those who pass by me? And when the town wanted to measure faith, they would hold a procession. When they wanted to measure malice, they would form a mob. Around hardened adult faces who confuse custom with justice, the preacher, torn between charity and the fear of contradicting the powerful, said phrases that served everyone and no one. Let us be merciful. But mercy there was short. I lead you through the Saturday market, past stalls of fudge, flour, and tobacco, where comments run faster than money. The sound of the ox cart, the distant bellow of cattle, the boots hitting the ground. The whole town seems to breathe the same heavy air, the air of easy judgment. And it is inside this hard, closed, merciless world that our story unfolds. Because when the square decides who is guilty, the truth is the first to be stoned. It is here that Mary Jane finds herself alone, and it is from this same ground that the hand that will lift her up will later emerge. But not yet. First, you need to feel the weight of this time, the coldness of these people, the distance between a poor house on the edge of the woods and the cruel force of the town center. Only then will you understand what each step, each gesture, in each word that came after meant. I stay with you in the silence of the lantern, in the creaking of the doors, in the rustling of the skirts, in the dust that rises from the gravel and does not settle. Because it is in this period setting where custom becomes sentence that the pain of the two protagonists begins to recognize each other from a distance, like someone seeing a bonfire light up. And when that spark grows, you will understand why what happens in the end leaves anyone in shock. I present to you Mary Jane as if I were seeing her now, sitting on the edge of the wooden bed, combing her hair in the weak light of the lantern. 20 years old, fair, beautiful enough to make an eye stop, light skin that the yard sun was beginning to bronze, delicate features, a simple way that didn't ask for attention, but received it. She grew up helping her mother with sewing and on the wood stove, learning to bake bread, to embroider sheets, to take care of what gives root inside the house. She dreamed of starting a family, a working husband, a tidy little house, a yard with the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. It was a dream so common, so honest, that it seemed guaranteed. The wedding came early, as was the custom. The church in the square was packed, bells rang, villagers came. I can almost hear the preacher's voice. May God unite you forever. And everyone smiled as if happiness had been stamped on the marriage certificate. In the beginning, the house was joy. Mary Jane swept the dirt floor, hung white clothes on the line, left the iron pot on the fire with beans bubbling. Her husband would arrive from work, wash his hands in the clay pot, sit and eat contentedly. They laughed, talked about the future. Soon the first one will come, he would say, and she, blushing, would answer softly, God willing. The months passed, 1, 2, 3. The neighbors, who loved to count other people's time, began to notice the silence of a cradle. Still nothing. It must be nerves. At Mr. Amancio's general store, tiny whispers turned into a hammer hitting wood. Mary Jane felt a mute tension inside, a guilt that she didn't even understand where it came from. At night, lying down, she prayed, "My God, don't let me fail." And she would wake up before dawn to light the fire, hoping the day would bring something new. The mother-in-law, a woman with a sharp tongue, began to sharpen the demands. "My dear, there's no lack of remedies for this. This herb tea, this folk healer. I have faith, ma'am. Faith without fruit is a dry branch, Mary." The phrase hung in the kitchen air like an impregnating smoke. The husband began to change his ways. First, there were longer silences, then comments that seemed like a joke, but hurt deeply. "The big house expects an heir. My father's eyes are on us." "I know, I'm trying." Trying. A woman who tries too much tires her husband. She swallowed hard, squeezed the dish towel in her hands, like someone holding on tight so as not to fall. She continued to do everything right the way they taught her. Cinnamon tea on the right moon day, a visit to the folk healer, a promise to a saint. Around, the adult women of the town multiplied with time. Bellies appeared, baptisms happened, and each party was a needle. More in Mary Jane's heart. I take you with me on a market morning. Wooden counter, smell of fudge, flour flying in open sacks. Mary Jane buys cheap fabric to sew a quilt. Her childhood friend, already married, leans in and whispers, "Be strong, you hear? God knows the time." "I'm fine," Mary replies, but her eyes say the opposite. The friend squeezes her hand, adult consoling adult, and leaves. Mary stays still, feeling the buzz at her back. It's like walking with an invisible sign hung on her neck. "No child here." The nights change their tone. The husband would arrive, leave his plate in the corner, avoid looking. My father asked again. "Tell him God is watching." My father doesn't pray with all that patience. "And you?" "Me? I got married the right way, and the right way bears an heir." Mary Jane would stop, breathe, pick up the pieces inside, and not let them fall. In secret, she embroidered on the cloth the design of a branch with 3 flowers. She tried to keep a hope alive that the people insisted on extinguishing. One late afternoon, she got up the courage and spoke. "If you want, we can go to the doctor in the next town." "Doctor for what? Everyone knows where the problem is." "No one knows." "I know." He got up from the table, pushed the chair with his foot, and the noise echoed in the small house like thunder. That night, Mary slept in the corner, hugging the pillow with no tears left to spend. The silence was not just an absence of words, it was a wall growing in the middle of the room. On Sunday after Mass, her mother-in-law pulled her by the arm, an adult speaking to another adult as if she were a child. "You have to understand that the family's honor is at risk. I'm your son's wife. A wife fulfills a duty. When she doesn't, she loses her place." Mary Jane was breathless. The square seemed wider, but there was no space where her heart could fit. "And I want you to feel with me what it's like to walk through dirt roads with your head held high, while the world pushes you down. It's an exercise in strength that no one applauds." Mary Jane would return home and run her hands over the furniture, as if looking for proof that she still belonged to that place. What would keep anyone on their feet was a gesture of affection, an outstretched hand, but for now there was none. There was only the loneliness inside closed doors and the noise of a town that judged without knowing. Time pulls the thread of humiliation, like someone weaving thick cloth. And before the final snap, the one you already saw being born there in the square, Mary Jane's life was closing in on narrow quarters. Each conversation became a dead end. Each piece of advice came with thorns. And I guarantee you, what is yet to happen will change the course of everything you think about this story. Later, when the truth comes, you will understand where the error was from the beginning. But not now. Now is the time to see, without hurry, who this young woman is behind the label that the town has stuck on her. Breathe with me. Remember her name, Mary Jane, because it will still echo differently when the truth knocks on the door. At the end of this part, tell me which city you are watching this story from. I really want to know how far my voice is reaching. I continue with you inside that wooden house, where each board creaked as if it knew more than it should. The wood stove burned slowly. The smell of freshly brewed coffee tried to sweeten an environment that already started the day sour. Mary Jane would wake up before the sun, wash her face in the enamel basin, tie her hair in a simple bun, and repeat to herself, "Today I can endure." There was a silent courage in the way she set the table, arranged the dish towel, dusted the yard, but courage also gets tired. Her husband would arrive from the street with hard footsteps. The belt buckle would make noise. The hat would fall on the chair and silence would sit down first. "Father asked again," he would say, staring. "I know," Mary replied with a low voice. "The whole town asks. It's not the town that sustains me, it's my father. I sustain this house with what I can." What you can is not what they expect. The phrase hung in the air, heavy as a forgotten hoe. He took the plate to his mouth, ate in 3 bites, got up without thanking, and went out to the yard. Mary stayed for a while looking at the door as if contemplating a wall where there was no window. Then she picked up the leftovers, wiped them with a cloth, took a deep breath, and went to the room. On the chest, a trousseau of sheets that she herself had embroidered with blue sprigs. It was a future that she had prepared with her hand, but that stubbornly refused to arrive. That late morning, the mother-in-law came with 2 gossips. They entered without knocking, as if the house had no owner. They sat down and arranged their skirts. "My dear," the mother-in-law began firmly, "the time to wait is over. I wait and I am. God helps those who do their part. The healer from the woods knows of one. I've already had it. Then have it again and make a promise." "I already did," one of the gossips chimed in. "Some women just need a scare. They say a scare straightens the womb." Mary bit her tongue, not out of fear, but out of respect, which she still insisted on feeling. "I'm not an animal to be scared," she said without raising her voice. The mother-in-law raised her chin. "In this house, respect is for those who honor the family." When the visitors left, taking with them the strong smell of cheap perfume and the ready sentence, Mary sat on the trunk and collapsed. She didn't cry loudly. She cried as if asking permission from the walls. She dried her eyes, got up, grabbed her shawl, and left. She went to her mother's house, 2 alleys away. "Daughter," her mother hugged her, adult comforting adult. "They don't know what they're saying. Mother, I do everything right. I pray. I drink tea. I keep quiet, and even so, quiet, you no longer stay. You hear? Quiet, we turn into shadows. He blames me. The error has no name when the people want to point it out. I'm afraid of what's coming," Mary confessed. Her mother held her hands. "We face fear with 2 things, truth and peace. Go look for a doctor. Daughter, even if they say it's a luxury, the truth always finds a way." "He doesn't want me to." "Go anyway. A consultation is not a sin." That afternoon, Mary put on a simple dress, took some counted money that she kept in the lining of her purse, and followed the road. She arrived at Mr. Amancio's general store, asked for a ride on old Tim's wagon, who was going to take corn to the next town. The journey was long, the sun beating on her neck, the sound of the wheels on the gravel like an iron rosary. At the doctor's office, a thin doctor with a thin mustache attended to her with quick smiles and cold fingers. He asked questions, wrote things on a paper, talked about exams that were not done there. "I won't lie, ma'am, without your husband here it's more difficult. But look, many times the difficulty is not with the woman." "Can you write that down, sir?" "I can, but paper that contradicts custom is usually torn up." "Even so, write it." He wrote, handed her a paper with tight letters, a kind of shield too small for the size of the world. On the way back, already late in the afternoon, the wagon passed by the square, people standing and watching. Her husband was leaning against the church wall, talking with 2 older men. He saw Mary get off the wagon with the envelope in her hands, came in her direction with contained anger. "Where did you go?" "I went to the doctor without my permission. I'm your wife, not your property. Here is who has the family's name, and who carries the shame on my back is me." He snatched the paper from her hand, opened it, looked at 2 lines and crumpled it. "This here is worthless. It's worth the truth. The truth is what the town sees, and the town sees that you didn't give me a child. The discussion grew, but it didn't turn into shouting. Shouts are short. They hurt each other with long phrases, the kind that cross the chest and stay there living. Men in the square looked on as if watching a weather forecast. Same clouds, same rain. Women whispered. No one moved to separate them. No one was willing to understand. The following days were similar to the previous ones, only heavier. The husband started sleeping more and more often away, at his father's farm, he said. Mary, in turn, increased her work. She swept, washed, ironed, like someone trying to save a boat by scooping out water with her hands. At night, she would embroider by the light of the lantern. Instead of flowers, she began to embroider lines without a design, a crooked path that seemed to mirror life. On a windy morning, her mother-in-law appeared again, now without the gossips, but with an old certainty in her eyes. My dear, understand, a man without an heir becomes a laughingstock, and a woman without a right becomes what? She becomes a problem. And we solve a problem. I am not a problem. Then you better not become one. Mary felt that the conversation was not a warning. It was a threat of change. The mother-in-law left and took with her the smell of an ending. Later the same day, a message arrived through a henchman of the old colonel. The town gathers tomorrow. There's a family matter that has become a town matter. Mary read the message and felt her stomach empty. She sat on the porch bench. The wide sky of the Midwest seemed close and far at the same time. Her mother came running, her dress flapping against her shins. Don't go alone, Mother. I've never been accompanied. I'll go with you. They don't listen to women. Then they'll have to listen to two. Don't put your name at risk. My name is already where yours is. I am your mother. When night fell, Mary lit the lantern and stayed looking at the flame dance. She remembered the wedding promises, the simple dress, her husband's smile in the first months. There was love there. She knew. What killed the love was not the absence of a child. It was the excess of other people's demands. Love needs silence to grow. And they lived in the middle of an endless chatter. She opened the trunk and took out the crumpled paper from the doctor that she had picked up from the ground in the square when no one was looking. She smoothed it with the palm of her hand, put it inside her dress. The truth is small, she thought, but it fits in your pocket. She lay down without wanting to sleep, but her body gave in. She dreamed of an open field and a hand that lifted her from the ground. She did not see the face in the dream. She only felt that it was a firm hand. The dawn came hard with a cold wind. Mary washed her face, dressed simply, tied her hair, and walked towards the square, next to her mother. At each step, she heard doors creak, eyes appear in the windows. The town was getting ready to watch. Her husband was already there, arms crossed, his father beside him, the preacher in a corner, and a few men with the air of being owners of the world. Today it is decided, said the father-in-law. Today I will speak, Mary replied, and I stay here with you, a little behind that circle, seeing how the weight of infertility does not reside in the womb, but in judgment. The square that was always a dirt floor now seemed like a courtroom. It's not yet the time for the snap that changes everything. It's still the time of the squeeze that prepares the snap, because that's how life does. It squeezes until the point of not fitting anymore. And when it doesn't fit, something happens, something that no one expects. But that's for the next step. The next day dawned gray, as if even the sky sensed the weight that would fall on Mary Jane. The main square with its dirt floor became a stage for judgment. There was no judge in a robe, no legal papers. The people were the judge. The shout was the sentence and shame was the penalty. Mary Jane arrived at the center, accompanied by her mother. She wore a simple, faded blue dress, her hair tied in a firm bun, and in her eyes she carried a mixture of fear and courage. Her husband was beside his father, chest puffed out, arms crossed, like someone leaning on another's strength. The church bell rang, calling not for mass, but for a spectacle. She is the curse of the family, a woman from the edge of the market shouted. If she doesn't have a child, she's not a wife. A man yelled, spitting on the ground. The stones had not yet flown, but the words were already hitting with the same force. Mary took a deep breath, squeezed her mother's hand, and took 2 steps forward. I am not a curse. I am a woman of flesh, blood, and faith. Faith doesn't fill a cradle, her mother-in-law retorted, her voice as sharp as a knife. The error is not mine, Mary insisted, and even if it were, no one has the right to stone me. The father-in-law, a man accustomed to giving orders that became law, raised his arm to silence the murmur. In this town, honor comes first, and you have dishonored the house of... It was at that moment that the first stone left the crowd. It wasn't big, but it hit Mary's shoulder. She staggered but did not fall. Another piece of hardened dirt hit her leg. The sound of stones against her body echoed with the shouts. "Sinner, useless, curse!" Her mother tried to put herself in front. "Stop, she's my daughter." But the force of the crowd did not give way. It was like a dirty river that drags everything. Mary, with her face already marked, raised her eyes to the sky. She did not cry loudly. She did not shout. She only said through gritted teeth, "It's not my fault. It's not my fault." And each time she repeated it, more stones came, as if humility were gasoline for hatred. Some looked on, did not throw, but also did not stop. The preacher, leaning against the church wall, murmured, "God have mercy," but did not move a step. Even her husband, who could have said enough, remained motionless. His silence hurt more than the stoning itself. The scene grew until the point where Mary fell to her knees, her dress stained with blood, her hands raised as if imploring for mercy. Her mother cried desperately, trying to cover her daughter with her body. But even so, the crowd had no pity. It is at this moment, at this exact instant of brutality, that destiny prepares a turnaround. Because every story of pain, when it reaches the bottom of the well, begins to open space for those who have the courage to change the course. And that's where someone you'll get to know better comes in. Someone who did not bow down before the cowardice. But not now. Now I want you to remember this scene, a whole square against one girl alone, a silence of accomplices and the sound of stones as a sentence. It is from this abyss that the story will be reborn. And before I continue this account, leave your like here, because this helps to take stories like this to more people. Stories that cannot be forgotten. Now I take you to the edge of the town, where the road turns into a trail and the woods take over the fences. There was John Paul's small farm, 28 years old, handsome, strong, muscular, one of those men that the sun does not defeat and work does not break. The house was simple, a room, a kitchen with a wood stove, a weathered board corral, and in the shallow pasture, a brown horse with attentive eyes, that he called Thunder, a companion for all comings and goings. John's day began before the rooster crowed. He would light the lantern, wash his face in the cold water of the pot, and roll up the sleeve of his shirt, revealing arms marked by work. In the corral, he spoke softly to the animal. "Let's go, Thunder. Today we're taking milk and cheese to the general store." The horse would hit its hoof as if it understood. John would saddle up, adjust the saddlebags, and set off at a calm pace that carried dust and hope in the same cadence. John had no luxury. He had dignity. He ate with a wooden spoon, slept on a wooden bed, but walked with his head held high. In town, not everyone liked that. There were those who would say with venom in their voice, "Proud poor people make trouble." He didn't respond. John's silence was a firm fence. He knew how far he would let others in. On that gray morning, the same one where the square decided to become a courtroom, John was coming down the road with 2 cheeses, bottles of milk, and a sack of flour that he had traded the month before. The cold wind pushed dry leaves across the ground. As he approached, he noticed a different noise. It wasn't the market bustle, nor the bell calling for prayer. It was a harsh noise, a mixture of voices, pushing in a rage that seemed to have no owner. Thunder stretched his neck, restless. "Calm down, friend. Let's see what it is." On the corner of the church, John saw the circle. People from all sides, men with hats pulled down, women with scarves tied tight on their heads. In the center, a young woman in a faded blue dress, on her knees, face marked with blood. Mary Jane. He knew her by sight. He remembered the girl who used to pass by with her mother, of the eyes that asked for nothing, of the tiny smile at the market. That scene did not fit in John's world. He dismounted in a jump, tied the horse to a post, and opened the way through the middle of the crowd. The smell of dust, sweat, and injustice hit his chest like a slap. "Excuse me," he said, trying to advance. "This is not the place for you, John," growled Arnaldo, a man connected to the powerful. Family matter. A matter of cowardice, you mean? John stared without looking down. On the other side, Mary's mother-in-law raised her sharp chin. What does the poor farmer have to do with this? What every Christian has to do with it when injustice comes, John replied firmly. He has everything to do with it. Mary's husband, arms crossed, decided to move. Don't get into where you are not called. I was called by her scream, John said, pointing with his chin to Mary, who was trembling. And by this stone on the ground, some men laughed, half embarrassed, half challenging. Others, accustomed to following the strongest, waited for orders with their heads down. The preacher, leaning against the wall, squeezed his rosary, torn between fear and duty. John took a deep breath. His chest rose and fell like a church bell before the toll. You are looking at the wrong person. He spoke loud enough for the circle to hear. The error does not reside in anyone's womb. It resides in the heart of those who judge. Arnaldo advanced a step, finger pointed. And what do you know about error, John? I know you don't hit a woman. I know you don't judge without truth. I know you don't throw stones at those who are already on the ground. Are you going to measure morality with those who run the town? Provoked the other Bento, the man with the rough voice. Morality has no owner. It has a price. And the price is courage, John retorted. In those seconds, something changed in the air. The crowd, which until then was one thing, began to divide into faces, shoulders, breaths. The sound of the insults lowered a half tone. It wasn't peace, it was hesitation. And hesitation in a mob is the first step for the truth to enter. John took 2 more steps and stood between the crowd and Mary. He didn't touch her? Not yet, but his body already said what he came for. The girl's mother wiped her tears, surprised that someone had stood up for them. Mary, with difficulty, raised her face and saw that man in a simple shirt, with firm eyes, ready to get hit in her place, if necessary. It was seconds, but they seemed like a thread of humility, connecting 2 destinies that still didn't even know the size of the scar they had in common. Last warning, John, hissed the red father-in-law, the vein in his neck pulsating. Get out of the way. Last warning, you all, John replied. Keep that stone and keep this shame. Not today. Thunder neighed, tied to the post, as if the sound came from the depths of the woods, calling his owner back to what was right. The wind raised dust. The lantern of Mr. Amancio's store hit the support lightly, and the church bell, without anyone touching it, swung just a little, as if the world were holding its breath. John loosened his shoulders, positioned his feet on the dirt ground, and decided, from that point on there was no turning back. He was going to enter the circle not for a fight for honor, not for a male challenge, but for decency. Because in that hard time, there were still men who knew that true strength is the one that protects, not the one that hurts. And it was when he took the first step forward, that step that separates the spectator from the guardian, that the story began to change its course like a river that finds another bank. What happens in the next instant is for the next chapter, because it is there in the middle of the dust and fear that the courage of a poor farmer will redesign Mary Jane's destiny. The circle of people was ready to crush what was left of Mary Jane's dignity. She could barely stay on her knees, her blue dress soaked in dust and blood. Her mother in tears tried to cover her daughter with her own body, but it was as if she were fighting against a whole storm. And suddenly the heavy silence of the square was cut by John Paul's firm voice. Enough, he shouted, advancing. 2 steps into the circle. You have lost your humanity. The people backed away a half step. His tone was not of a plea, it was of an order. John crouched down and, without asking for permission, put his strong arm around Mary Jane's back. She, dizzy and weak, tried to protest. Don't leave me. They will hurt you too. They will have to pass over me first, he replied, lifting her in his arms as if she were light. Mary's husband took a step forward, his face burning with anger. Let go, that's my wife. This is a shame for me. John stared at him firmly. Shame is letting people stone someone who should be protected. Shame is being silent when your wife cries out for help. The crowd murmured, torn between supporting the husband and feeling the weight of John's words. The preacher, previously silent, gave an audible sigh and said, The Lord does not approve of cruelty. But that was all. He didn't have much courage. John did not wait for a response. With Mary in his arms, he made his way. Some tried to block him, but he used his gaze and posture to impose himself. The people knew how to recognize when strength came not only from the muscles, but also from courage. And at that moment, no one had the guts to face him. Mary's mother came behind, sobbing like a shadow of protection. The husband, humiliated, did not dare to interfere, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of cowardice. The mother-in-law and father-in-law remained motionless, the venom in their mouths locked by surprise. John reached his horse, Thunder, who neighed impatiently. "Hang in there, ma'am," he murmured, adjusting her on the saddle. "You won't get hit any more today." Mary, almost fainting, leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered in a weak voice, "Why are you doing this?" John took a deep breath, adjusted his hat on his head, and replied, "Because no one deserves to bleed for carrying a guilt they don't have." He mounted behind her, holding her firm so she wouldn't fall, and set off down the dirt road. The dust rose, the square was left behind, and the noise of the voices diminished until it was just a distant echo. With each step of the horse, Mary felt her body weigh less. Not because the pain was gone, it still throbbed in every wound, but because for the first time someone was carrying her not as a burden, but as a life that was worth saving. Arriving at the small farm, John took her into the house, settled her in the simple bed, covered her with a worn blanket, and placed a damp cloth on her forehead. Her mother, still trembling, held her daughter's hand, grateful. "God pay you back, John. Only He knows what you did today." He replied softly, almost a whisper. "I just did what any real man should do." While Mary closed her eyes, exhausted, John sat on a small stool, looking at her in silence. Inside his chest, he felt that that gesture would change not only her life, but also his. And I ask you, if you were in John's place, would you have the courage to face a whole town to save a life? Leave your answer in the comments. In John Paul's small wooden house, the silence of the night was only broken by the sound of the wind crossing the cracks in the walls and by the distant neigh of thunder, restless in the corral. Mary Jane was lying on the simple bed, her body covered in bruises, her skin scratched, and her face marked by the dried blood that John, with care, was cleaning with a damp cloth. Each time he passed the cloth on her skin, she would flinch a little, like someone who still feared human touch. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you," John said in a calm voice. "I just want you to get better." She opened her eyes slowly, her voice weak. I should have stayed there. Now they will turn against you." John shook his head firmly. "I'm already used to going against the tide. But you, Mary, didn't have thought to pay for anything. You didn't." Her mother, sitting in a corner of the kitchen, prayed softly, asking for strength. From time to time, she would get up, prepare a tea of herbs she knew well, and help her daughter drink it. Mary would cough, feel the bitter taste, and obey. "Thank you, Mother." "Don't thank me, daughter. I just want to see you on your feet again." The days passed slowly. Mary couldn't walk properly at first. Every movement was a reminder of the violence she had suffered. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake up with a start, her eyes wide open, her body sweaty, and she would scream, "Don't stop! Don't throw!" John, who slept in a hammock outside the room, would run immediately, light the lantern, and hold her hand carefully. "Everything's okay, Mary. No one will touch you here." And she would cry softly, curled up, until sleep returned. John would stay there sitting on the edge of the bed, watching over her rest like someone protecting something fragile that could no longer be broken. Over time, the marks on her body began to disappear, but those of the heart remained open. The shame, the feeling of being looked at as a curse did not go away easily. One late afternoon, looking out the window at the golden pasture, Mary spoke softly. "Why are people like this?" John took a while to answer, leaning his arms on the window too. "Because it's easier to point a finger than to extend a hand. They don't understand that pain is not a sin." "I can't take this weight anymore." "Then let me carry it with you." Mary looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know if she could really trust him, but there was something in that man that seemed different from anything she had ever seen. He asked for nothing in return, demanded no explanations. He just was there. One morning, when she could already take a few steps, Mary insisted on helping. "John, let me sweep the house. I need to feel useful." He smiled, leaning on the doorframe. A simple house doesn't demand so much effort. But if it will do you good, sweep. And she swept. Each movement of the broom was like a piece of life returning to its place. The dust rose, the sunlight entered through the cracks. And for the first time since that night, Mary felt that she could take a deep breath. But it wasn't just her who carried scars. John, although quiet, had marks he didn't show. Sometimes sitting alone on the porch, he would look at the horizon with a furrowed brow. Mary noticed. You also carry pain, don't you? He sighed, fiddling with his hat between his hands. Life has never been light for me. My father died defending the land that I'm trying to take care of today. I was left alone too early, but I learned one thing. We can't let pain become our owner. His words stayed in Mary's mind. She began to see that the strength that sustained that man came not only from his muscles, but from a silent resistance that the world had not managed to bend. Every day, between a sip of tea and a timid step in the yard, the trust between the two grew. It was not yet declared love, but it was something stronger than indifference. It was the recognition that two wounded souls, when they meet, begin to sew themselves into one another. And so in that simple setting, made of earth, sweat, and care, Mary Jane took her first steps towards a recovery. Every gesture from John, a wet cloth, a comforting word, a plate of food left beside the bed, was like a brick in the reconstruction of her life. There was still a lot ahead, because the pain does not end all at once. It gives way little by little, until it makes space for the unexpected that is yet to come. The following days were of silence and short steps. Mary Jane, with her face already less swollen, began to move around John Paul's house, like someone relearning to exist. I see the scene. She washes her hands in the basin, ties her hair, and breathes before crossing the kitchen door to the yard. The sun is still a shock to her eyes, but now there is a bench in the shade and a voice that says, "It's all right." Whenever her heart races. "If you get tired, sit down." John advises, leaning the bucket on the ground. "Hurry is how pain rules us." "I don't want to be a burden," she replies, adjusting her dress. "A burden is what the town puts on your back. Here you are a person." He slowly takes her to the corral. Thunder, the brown horse, takes 2 steps forward, smells the air, and lowers his head, docile. Mary extends her hand carefully. He's beautiful, a companion for everything. John smiles to the side. He listens more than many Christians. Little by little, the routine becomes a remedy. John shows her how to milk a cow without hurting it, how to change the water in the trough, how to sweep the board floor so the dust doesn't turn into a disease. Mary tries. She messes up, laughs at herself softly, a timid laugh that seems to find its own mouth strange. And I tell you, it is in this small laugh that life begins to return. But the town did not forget. Soon a crooked message arrives. At Mr. Amancio's general store, John leans the cheese on the counter and listens. "I'm not buying today, John. They're saying around here that you stepped where you shouldn't have." "Did my cheese change its taste?" "Not the taste, the gossip. Those who live on gossip are not hungry." John takes the cheese back. "Those who are hungry, buy." 2 men in the back whisper loudly for him to hear. The poor man turned into a hero for a woman without a child. Not a hero, a fool. It's going to backfire on him. John turns his back. The word that's no good, he doesn't take home. Still, the door that closes weighs on his pocket. Less money, more uncertainty. At home, Mary notices the difference. They stopped buying? They stopped. Because of me? No, because of them. Guilt doesn't change owners when it crosses the fence. At night, after a simple dinner, the two sit on the porch. Mary's mother has already returned home, but she comes every afternoon to help a little. The wind rustles the grass below. Mary squeezes the crumpled envelope from the doctor between her fingers. "Can I show you something?" "Everything that's yours fits here," John says. She hands him the paper. He reads it slowly in the lantern light, underlining each word. Many times the difficulty is not with the woman. And 2 more shy but insistent technical lines. "You're not to blame, Mary. I don't know if it's certain." Certainty. We build it where custom tried to cover up the truth. She sighs, relieved and scared at the same time. If this is true, why did they do all that to me? Because when a powerful man is afraid of the mirror, he breaks the glass and says it's the fault of who got cut. The threats also come down the dirt road. One afternoon, John finds a small board nailed to the gate with crooked letters in charcoal. Return the infertile one. The town wants peace. He tears the board off with a jerk and breaks it in two with his hands. I'm not going to read this, he says, throwing the halves into the fire of the stove. They'll be back, Mary says without drama, just with tiredness. Let them come back. We'll stay. The next day, John leaves early to get rock salt and tools. When he comes back, he brings a folded cloth. I brought it for you, he says awkwardly. For me? A blue shawl. Your dress has taken enough of a beating. Mary runs her fingers over the fabric. It's simple but new, a small novelty that disarms the chest. Thank you. You don't need to thank me. Here we fix what the world broke. In the late afternoon, they bake bread together. She measures the flour. He heats the water. The two laugh when the dough sticks to John's fingers. I've never seen a farmer knead bread. John has the bread, she comments. Have you seen a man who doesn't learn what he needs to? He replies, wiping his hand on the apron. The smell of baked bread opens a crack of childhood in her memory, and her eyes well up without warning. I promised I wouldn't cry anymore. Who promised that? The you who knew nothing about life. Crying is the water that puts out the fire inside. But the world is persistent. When night falls, they hear footsteps outside, a rustling in the bushes and a clinking of a bottle hitting the post. John grabs the lantern, goes out to the fence, and finds a dead chicken hung on the barbed wire. A cowardly message. He unties it, buries the animal without saying a word. He comes back with a closed expression. Was it the town? She asks, already knowing the answer. It was their fear disguised as courage. I'm getting in the way of your life, John. It's better for me to go. He holds her gaze with firmness. You're not a detour, you're a person. And here, no one throws away what is a person. His courage is not a shout, it's constancy. The next day, he wakes up at the same time, repeats the same tasks. He tastes the cheese, checks the salt, talks to thunder, takes care of the fences. Mary, in turn, tidies the house, sews the torn dish towel, sweeps, and when her body asks for rest, she sits in the shade and just breathes, a luxury she didn't have before. It's as if the two of them, each with their own pain, made a silent pact. I won't let go of you. You won't let go of me. And let the rest of the world learn to leave us be. One night, the subject they had avoided since the beginning finally arrives. If I left, you would be safer. Mary says, security that needs your absence is a prison. I choose the risk with you here. Why? Because your pain talks to mine, and when two pains recognize each other, they become strength. The phrase stays still between them, big without embellishment. It's not a hasty declaration. It's not a serial drama promise. It's just the truth. And the truth there is what sustains them. I stay for a while with this image, the lantern trembling in the night, their hands clean of flour, the bread cooling on the cloth, and a silent pact that the world outside still doesn't know about, but will learn to respect. Deep down in the darkness of the corral, thunder snorts, as if approving, and the wind passes through the leaves, carrying away a little of what was left of the day. Shared suffering becomes lighter. It is the first brick of what they will still build, with work, with a wound, with patience and courage. The rest, I promise you, comes at the right time. Before we continue, tell me, did you subscribe to the channel? This ensures that you don't miss the continuation of this story. The days turned into weeks, and John Paul's simple house, which before carried only the silence of solitary work, began to gain another sound. The noise of light footsteps, the dragging of the broom on the floor, the crackle of the wood lit up too early, because Mary Jane couldn't stay in bed. She needed to feel part of something. And John, without ever saying it aloud, let her. One morning he found her in the yard, crouching near the vegetable garden. Her hands, still fragile, moved in the earth, trying to firm up lettuce seedlings. You shouldn't be trying so hard, he said, leaning his hat on his knee. She smiled slightly without raising her face. I don't want to be a guest here. I want to help. Nobody is a guest here. Whoever treads with truth is also an owner. The simple life, made of small gestures, began to return a dignity to her that the people had ripped away. Mary Jane learned to handle fresh milk, to to turn cheese carefully so it wouldn't crack, to hang clothes so the wind wouldn't take them. Each task was as if a stone was being put back in the wall of her life. In the afternoon, as the sun set and painted the field gold, she liked to sit on the porch and listen to John sharpening his hoe, the metallic sound mixed with the distant singing of a harmonica player from town. It was on one of those afternoons that she risked a question she had been holding for days. "John, aren't you afraid that people will come back?" He raised his eyes, pensive. "I'm afraid, Mary. Anyone who says they're not is lying. But courage is not living without fear. It's living despite it." She was silent, looking at the horizon like someone engraving the phrase in her memory. A companionship that went beyond words also soon arose between them. When John returned from the fields with arms heavy with tiredness, he would find the house tidy, the food ready, and a cloth folded on the table. He didn't say it, but his look thanked her. Mary noticed and, without knowing how to explain it, felt at home. Not just a wooden house, but a place where her heart could fit. One night after they finished dinner, Mary gathered courage and spoke. "I never thought I would find peace in the midst of shame." John looked at her fixedly, his face illuminated by the lantern. "The shame is not yours, Mary, it's theirs. You just carried what they threw on your back." She took a deep breath, emotional. "But you shared this weight with me. I just did what was right, the right thing that no one did." Little by little, Mary got used to the idea that she could indeed start over. And John, without even realizing it, also changed. He was no longer the lonely man who spent his days alone between cattle and horse. He had company to share breakfast with, to hear the rooster crow, to laugh at a bread dough that didn't turn out right. The town still commented. Some said that John had gone crazy, others that he was condemned for getting involved with the infertile one. But inside that house, these voices did not reach. It was as if the wooden walls were strong enough to muffle the malice from outside. One morning when the sun was clearing the yard, Mary went out with the blue shawl that John had given her. The wind blew and lifted the fabric, and she smiled. It was the first time in a long time that the smile came without effort. John, seeing her, stopped filling the animal's trough and just watched. It was as if that moment confirmed that, despite everything, life knows how to flourish in the most arid places. Life was starting over there, in the simplicity of a small farm, between the fertile land and the still open scars. And this new beginning was not made of miracles or great turnarounds. It was made of work, of respectful silence, of looks that spoke more than long phrases. The suffering was still present, but instead of separating, it began to unite. It was just the beginning of a new story, still marked by pain, but now with the silent promise that nothing would be the same as before. What was being built there, brick by brick, gesture by gesture, had the strength to resist the judgment of a whole town. Time passed, but the wound left in the town's heart did not heal. People still talked, still whispered on the street corners, and eyes continued to weigh on Mary Jane and John Paul whenever they needed to cross the square to sell something or buy supplies. The town was too small to keep silent. Each life was an open book in the hands of others. At Mr. Amancio's general store, where the smell of burnt coffee mixed with the dust of flour in the air, the whispers were poison dripping. "He gave shelter to the infertile one. Can you believe it?" said a woman with a scarf on her head. "He's nothing but a poor man trying to challenge tradition," another replied, scratching his mustache. "It's a shame, that's what it is. The whole town already knows." One afternoon, John entered the establishment with his usual firm posture. He placed 2 cheeses on the counter, looked at Mr. Amancio and said, "Here's the month's delivery." The nervous merchant avoided looking at him. "John, you'd better look for another place to sell. They're pressuring me." "Who's pressuring you?" "The ones on top. They say that if I buy from you, they'll block my goods on the road." John took a deep breath, but did not lower his head. "Then you keep your conscience. I'll take my cheeses back." He picked up the basket and left, but not without hearing the voices behind him, malicious, sharp as a knife. "Look at him, the farmer of the infertile one. He's going to end up alone, just like her." Mary Jane, who was waiting for him at the door, noticed by his manner that something was not right. "They didn't buy. They didn't, because of me. It's not because of you, it's because they're afraid of your courage. And courage scares more than sickness. She held his arm firmly, as if to say she wouldn't let go. It was the first time in public that Mary did not shrink before the malicious words, and this did not go unnoticed. The whole town began to look with even more anger, because those who do not lower their heads become a threat. The following days were worse. Some men began to prowl John's farm. At night, stones were thrown at the roof, chickens disappeared from the yard, and fire marks appeared near the fence. As a warning, John, without backing down, reinforced the wood, kept the rifle leaning against the door, and continued to take care of the land. "They want to see me on the ground," Mary said one night, with her eyes full of tears. "They want to see us on the ground, but I won't let them." John looked at her firmly. "You have already been humiliated once. You will not be twice." The preacher, pressured, went to their house, knocked on the door with the rosary wrapped in his hand. "John, Mary, I need to give you some advice." "Advice or a threat?" John asked directly. "Don't talk to me like that." "I'm just saying it's better not to challenge the town." "The town needs an example, preacher, not silence. When an example can be costly. More costly than her life already cost?" John pointed to Mary. "More costly than the blood that the square has already taken from her?" The preacher did not answer. He just lowered his eyes and left like someone who knew the truth, but did not have the courage to defend it. And so, with each gesture of resistance, each time John protected Mary, the town's judgment became heavier. They no longer saw her just as infertile. Now they saw the two of them as an affront that needed to be broken. But inside the simple house, even under attack, Mary and John were beginning to find a strength that no one expected. It was not made of wealth, nor of power. It was made of loyalty, of shared pain, of hands that held each other when the whole world wanted to pull them apart. I leave this scene with you, a couple against a whole town, but raised by a love born in pain. And I want you to answer in the comments, does justice for Mary Jane deserve to be told? If you think so, write justice for Mary Jane. The afternoon fell heavy, with low clouds promising a light rain. John was reinforcing the fence when he heard a crackle in the bushes and then the whistle of a stone that passed too close to his head. He ducked in a reflex, heard laughter running, and only saw dust. He returned home with his jaw clenched, but without saying anything to Mary. He didn't want to increase her fear. He prepared the bath, put water to boil, and the two had dinner quietly, like someone who learns to survive without making noise. In the early evening, there was a knock on the door. 3 hurried, nervous knocks. John opened it and came face to face with the thin doctor from the next town. The same one who had written the note a while ago. The man was holding a worn hat with both hands, like someone asking for permission before speaking. "I need to talk," he said low. It's something serious." Mary appeared in the doorway, a blue shawl in her hair. "Please, come in, doctor." He entered, looked around, noticed the simple house, the wood stove, a bread covered by a clean cloth. He took a deep breath, chose his words like someone walking on a mined ground. "I should have said this before, but fear was greater than my courage." "What are you talking about, sir?" John asked with a contained voice. The doctor took a thick brown envelope from his coat, sealed with string. "When Mrs. Mary came to my office, I wrote that because I already suspected, but today I am sure. I found an old record, kept for caution, that was hidden." John and Mary looked at each other. The doctor opened the envelope, spread papers on the table. Yellowish sheets, blurred stamps, pencil notes. "This is your ex-husband's medical record. He came to me years ago before the wedding. He had the mumps when he was a young man. The infection attacked what it shouldn't have. I wrote everything down. I spoke with his father at the time. I said there was a serious risk of sterility." "You told him that?" Mary put her hand to her mouth. "I told him and was silenced. His father called me into a closed room. He said I didn't know who I was dealing with, that information didn't exist. He threatened to take away my patients, my medicines, and even my instruments. If I insisted, I swallowed hard and kept quiet." The doctor lowered his eyes, embarrassed. "I made copies of the papers and hid them for precaution, for the truth." The silence that followed was dense. The noise of the lantern seemed too loud. John rested his hands on the table. Are you sure of what you are saying, sir? I am, and I will sign again if you need me to. I know it's late, but it's not fair that the whole town stones the wrong side of the story. Mary leaned against the back of the chair, her whole body trembling, without her being able to control it. The memories of the square, the stones, her husband's still face, her mother-in-law's voice saying curse, everything came back in a single wave. She closed her eyes and breathed so as not to collapse. I carried this guilt alone, she said at last in a hoarse voice. I was humiliated. I lost my name, my house, my peace. I know, the doctor replied with guilt in his eyes, and I never forgave myself for staying silent. I came today because I heard they want to settle the score with you both, and I thought, and if they are going to settle scores, let it be with the truth on the table. John pulled a chair for the doctor, but he refused with a gesture. He was too restless to sit. Mary picked up one of the papers and slowly read the words that changed everything. There were few lines, simple, but they had the weight of a world. Sequelae post-mumps, possible infertility. Evaluation indicates compromise. She held the paper like someone holding a boat in the middle of a flood. This town killed me in public square, she whispered. And even so, what I feel most now is relief. Relief to know that it wasn't me, that it never was. John approached slowly. He touched her back with his fingers. The gesture was short and whole. You didn't need this paper to be innocent, Mary, but now we have proof. What are you going to do? The doctor asked anxiously. I can go with you. I can speak in front of anyone who needs to. No, not today, John said firmly. Today we keep this with us. Tomorrow is market day, and those who started lying in public square have to hear the truth on the same ground. The doctor nodded between fear and courage. I'll be at the church in the morning. If they call me, I'll speak. If they don't, I'll go in anyway. Doctor, Mary called. He stopped at the door. Thank you. He tried to smile, but his face gave way to a plea for forgiveness. Sorry I took so long. The truth should have been in a hurry. When the door closed, the house seemed bigger. John collected the papers, tied them with a string, and put them inside an empty kerosene can that he kept in the high cabinet, the place where he hid what the world could not steal. This is our fence now, he said, tapping the can lightly. No one can jump over it. Mary walked to the window. The pasture outside was dark and thunder shook his mane as if he sensed that something had changed. She thought of the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, her husband standing still in the square. She thought of the stones and she thought of the next day. I don't want revenge, John. I just want my name back. The truth returns it. It may take time, but it returns it. The rain finally began to fall lightly, wetting the dry earth without a fuss. They stayed for a while in silence. The sound of the water on the roofs listening was as if the sky were washing away a little of what the people had dirtied. Mary discreetly wiped her eyes. John adjusted the lantern. There was a peace in that moment made of courage. The next day the town would wake up as always. A bell, calling, a store opening, people counting coins and a rooster crowing. But this time there was a truth folded inside a can, ready to be opened in front of everyone. And when it was opened, nothing would be the same as before. Because there are secrets that when they come out don't just change a story, they change the way a whole town looks at itself in the mirror. The next morning dawned tense. The church bell sounded different, more grave, as if calling not for prayer, but for judgment again. The whole town gathered in the square. The whispers ran like fire on dry straw. Today John is going to explain himself. Today Mary is going to face them head on. Mary Jane walked beside John, the blue shawl tied tightly on her head, hiding part of the marks that had not yet healed completely. Her step was hesitant, but John's hand over hers gave her strength. He was carrying hidden inside his jacket the can with the doctor's papers. The proof that could turn destiny upside down. Mary's ex-husband was already in the center of the square, surrounded by his father and mother, who spoke loudly as if they were commanding the people. Today, this shame ends, shouted the father-in-law, raising his arm. The town will hear the truth. Mary, with a firm voice, replied, That's right. Today everyone will hear, but not your lie. the truth that you hid. The murmur spread. No one expected her to speak with such courage. Her husband took a step forward, trying to maintain control of the situation. You have no right to accuse me in public. John stood between them, his voice grave, cutting. He who has nothing to hide does not fear. So listen. He took the can from inside his jacket, opened it, and showed the papers. The doctor who had promised to be present took 2 steps forward, his face pale, but determined. It was I who wrote this. I examined your husband years ago. He had a severe case of mumps and was left with sequelae. Even before the wedding, I already knew that he could be sterile. I warned his father, but they told me to be silent. A deadly silence fell over the square. The people who until then had murmured insults now looked at each other, stunned. The father-in-law, furious, tried to snatch the papers from John's hand. Lies, this doesn't prove anything. But the doctor raised his voice. It does prove it. It's my stamp, my handwriting, and if needed, I will confirm it in any court. Mary, with tears in her eyes, turned to her ex-husband. So all these years, it was I who carried the guilt of your silence. He did not answer. He lowered his eyes, defeated. The mask he had sustained in front of the town began to crack. Her mother-in-law, trying to regain strength, shouted, She is still useless. A woman has to have a child, and if she doesn't, she's no good. It was then that the people themselves began to turn against her. A woman from the market raised her voice. Enough, ma'am. We saw her being stoned like an animal, and now we discover that it wasn't her fault. It's your family who should be ashamed. Others joined in. It's true, a man shouted. We were wrong about her. We were all wrong, completed the preacher, finally finding the courage to speak up. The sin here was not infertility. It was injustice. Mary, emotional, held John's hand. He looked at her and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, I saw this woman bleed in the square. I carried her in my arms and saw her dignity be greater than the cowardice of all of us. And now you know it was never her fault. The people who were once aggressive now were torn between shame and emotion. Some lowered their heads, others asked for forgiveness in a low voice. The ex-husband, ashamed, left the square with his head down, without the courage to face the stairs. Mary took a deep breath, feeling the weight she had carried for so many years finally fall away. Her tears were no longer of pain, but of liberation. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The truth was finally clear, and it was at that instant that the story turned. The woman that the town wanted to bury with stones rose in front of everyone with the strength of someone who survived the impossible. And beside her, a man who had no power or wealth, but had what none of them possessed, the courage to face a crowd. This was the turnaround, the moment when pain stopped being just suffering and became the bridge that united 2 marked souls, but firm against the whole world. After the revelation in the square, the air seemed different. The weight that had always surrounded Mary Jane began to disappear like mist that the sun insists on clearing. But with the relief also came the tiredness, not of the body, but of the soul, of someone who was crushed by years of injustice. She walked slowly to the middle of the square, still with the blue shawl in her hair, and looked at each face that had previously thrown a stone. There was no anger in her eyes. There was a painful calm that only those who have suffered so much can carry. I don't want revenge, she said, her voice firm but choked up. I just wanted you to know the truth. I am not a curse. I never was. The people lowered their heads. Some cried with shame. Others walked away in silence. The preacher, who had been silent before, approached with tears in his eyes. Forgive me, my daughter. The silence I kept was an accomplice to the pain you carried. Mary just replied, The forgiveness is not mine, preacher. It's God's. But I no longer have the strength to hate anyone. John, who watched her in silence, approached, held her hand in front of everyone with firmness, without fear of the stares. Mary, you are not alone. You never will be again. And looking at the town, he completed, I am poor, but my chest is rich with courage. I will not let go of her hand. And if you want to judge me too, then judge me. I can take it. Mary looked at him, her eyes teary, and let the tears run down without shame. It was the first time she cried, not out of pain, but out of liberation. John, you were the only one who saw me as a person, not a burden. You saved my life, but more than that, You gave me back my right to exist." At that moment, the silence of the square was broken by something different. Not insults nor stones, but a timid applause coming from a woman who had previously criticized her. Then another from a man from the market, and more, and the sound of clapping took over the place. It was not applause from a party. It was applause of repentance, of late recognition. Mary couldn't hold back the crying. She leaned her head on John's chest, and he wrapped her in his strong arms, protecting her like someone who guards a treasure that he will never let be destroyed again. "They took everything from me," she said, sobbing. "But you gave me back my life." "The life is yours, Mary. I just held on when they tried to rip it away." The light rain began to fall again, washing the square's floor, erasing the dust, carrying away the dried blood that still marked the past. For many, that was just a coincidence. But for those who saw it up close, it seemed that the sky itself was crying with them. Not out of pain, but out of emotion. Hand in hand, Mary Jane and John left there without hurry. They no longer needed to hide. The whole town, once cruel, now accompanied them with different eyes. Not everyone changed overnight, but the respect, the silence, the absence of stones was enough. On that day, more than a couple was born. A promise was born, that of rebuilding a whole life together, not from the wounds, but in spite of them. And what united Mary and John was not the miracle of a child or the approval of the town. It was something deeper, the meeting of two broken souls who, when they embraced, discovered that shared pain becomes strength and that true love flourishes even in the most arid terrain. And there in front of everyone, John kissed Mary Jane's forehead with respect and tenderness. And she, with tears running down her face, closed her eyes and smiled. It was the beginning of a new life, and I tell you, few endings are as beautiful as this one, in which love is born from pain, but flourishes in hope. Time passed, and John Paul's simple farm stopped being just a refuge. It became a home. Mary Jane, once marked by pain and injustice, now found a new way of living in the routine of the land and in the mutual